So it's July 17 of 1888. The sun hasn't even cleared the trees, but you're already awake. Your cotton nightshirt clings to your skin. The bedroom window is wide open, yet not a single breeze. You hear your father outside pumping water from the well before the day's heat has become unbearable. Now your mother is already preparing breakfast, not because she's an early riser, but because by noon the wood stove will make the kitchen feel like the inside of a hot, hot furnace. Oh, we might need a couple fans for this. There is no thermostat to adjust, no fan humming in the background corner, just your self fan. No refrigerator with cool lemonade. I've got my lemonade today. And I have also been without air conditioning this year. Today, just like yesterday, survival depends on planning every hour around the sun in the summertime. Imagine now, it's the middle of July. The temperature has climbed way past 100 degrees. Your skin is hot, it's wet, you're sticky. Even ice is a luxury only some families can afford. Now, how would you survive this? Welcome back to Jodi Genealogy. Woohoo! Where we uncover the forgotten stories, everyday lives, and hidden history that has shaped the world as we know it today. I love family stories, and I love stories. Let's go back into time to the pioneer days. Let's go back when there isn't air conditioning. Let's go back in the Little House on the Prairie kind of days. I love those books. When we think about history, we often picture wars or famous figures or grand events. But today we're exploring something every single person who came before us had to face, and that is the summer sweltering heat. Now, long before electricity transformed our homes, people relied on integrity. They relied on architecture and nature and a little bit of determination to see what worked, to survive these sweltering summers. Some of their methods might surprise you, and even few might even make you appreciate your air conditioning a little bit more. Boy, I wish I had air conditioning. So grab your cold drink and settle in, and let's step back into time before the sun was high. For much of history, people didn't fight the heat, they worked around it. Farmers often woke well before sunrise, taking advantage of that cold morning air to accomplish the hardest labor before the midday became sun, and it became completely unbearable. By early afternoon, many communities just completely slowed down. In warmer climates, businesses closed their doors. Families retreated indoors, and the world seemed to pause. Until it was evening. It wasn't laziness at all, it was just pure survival. Now, when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, neighborhoods became alive again. The children played out in the streets, and the neighbors visited on each other's front porches. And conversations drifted through the evening breeze as neighbors sat and visited each other on their porches, telling stories or sharing about their lives of what has been going on that day. History isn't just found in the battles of presidents. Sometimes it's found in the child chasing the lightning bugs on a humid July evening. Or it's in the creak of Grandpa's rocking chair on the front porch and listening to Grandma and Grandpa's stories. Or the neighborhood ice wagon. Or to the ice cream truck with its twinkling music going down the road that every child hopes to stop at their house. Do you remember being a child and having the ice cream truck go by your home? Did you run outside as fast as you could with your parents' change or your own change from babysitting and run out there in your bare feet? Those were the days. I could use an ice cream cone right now. Those white vans covered in delicious popsicle stickers with anticipation of cool treats on a hot day. Those ordinary moments tell us just as much of our ancestry as any tree could. I love the stories. 1936, the North American heat wave. With those moments in history that feel almost unimaginable. It was the summer that heat just wouldn't end. It began quietly. Spring had been dry across much of the Midwest. Farmers looked toward the sky, hoping for rain that never seemed to come. By June, the fields were already turning brown, and then July arrived. The air stopped moving. There was no relief. Not in the morning, not after sunset. Each day seemed hotter than the one before. The families already struggling through the Great Depression, there was absolutely no escape. Air conditioning existed, but very few places. Even after midnight, temperatures still remained above 90 degrees, and homes were now baking ovens. Across the plains, the Dust Bowl had already scoured the land. Now the relentless heat was baking whatever moisture had remained. Corn curled into brittle stalks, wheat withered before the harvest, pastures turned gray, cattle stood around, dried up watering holes, too exhausted to search for food. Farmers watched years of work disappear in a matter of weeks, and many would never recover. And then in the Midwest, places like Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, Des Moines, hundreds of small towns, the sidewalks were shimmering with heat. Streetcar rails were expanding and roads were buckling. Workers collapsed at construction sites and in factories where temperatures were rising well over 100 degrees in this dangerous outdoor heat. Doctors were treating heat stroke and the hospitals were overflowing. And ice became a lifeline. Now, back then, many homes were built to breathe. Many older homes were designed with summer in mind. High ceilings allowed rising heat to collect above the living spaces. Large windows lined up across the house to create that natural breeze. Wide open porches shaded the walls from all that direct sunlight, while the enormous maple trees and oak trees acted like living umbrellas that were always nice to relax under after a lovely Sunday brunch with family. Now, long before architects could rely on air conditioning, they relied on nature itself. Some families even hung damp sheets over their open windows as the breezes passed through the wet fabric. The evaporation cooled the air naturally in the homes. Ooh, I could use that right now. It was a remarkably simple way. Natural air conditioning. I might have to try that one. Now, my great-grandma Tina would be busy in the early mornings, boiling the diapers on the kitchen stove. She would use the stove on the front entry. They had one in the kitchen and then one in a front breezeway that wouldn't heat up the whole house. The girls would be helping their mother in the morning with all the chores, the diapers, the cleaning, and helping tend to all the little ones that just kept coming along. And there was a baker's dozen with Grandma Tina. Each morning, after all the diapers were done and the babies were taken care of, the girls would make a huge angel food cake on that outdoor stove. They would cook it through the day, and then at night, when the air turned a little bit cooler, they would sit along a really long table and enjoy it all together, eating angel food cake after dinner. And at night, it was the coolest place to live. During the brutal summers, many families abandoned their bedrooms altogether. Have you ever noticed like the open porches from back then, or open balconies up above? And like the two-story homes? You don't see it much nowadays in the newer homes, but in the older two-story homes, a lot of times they had open balconies. Beds were carried onto these sleeping porches, on the rooftops, or even sometimes in the yard. As a kid, did you ever sleep outside in the yard and make a little fort to stay cool? Imagine looking up at the sky filled with stars and trying to catch every tiny little breeze. Little children with their bare feet all snuggled up with the fresh air for a good night's rest. Now, during these brutal summers, many families abandoned their bedrooms altogether. Now, these second-story porches on the older homes, they weren't just like decorative, which, you know, they look pretty, like you could stand up there and wave to people, right? But they were actually architectural features. They were built back then for a purpose. It was before all the air conditioning, and they became what is known as the summertime bedrooms. As the day heat finally slowed and drifted away, fathers carried heavy mattresses outside, and mothers tucked their freshly washed quilts over their beds and the children. Barefoot and exhausted from the day and all the chores and all the play, they would climb beneath the covers while the evening breeze gently rustled the curtains and the quilts. There was no glow from the television screens back then, no humming of the air conditioners. There were no cell phones. Instead, there was a chorus of crickets, the steady song of the cicadas, the distant hoot of the owls, and perhaps the soft whistle of a passing train somewhere across the countryside. And still to this day, I can hear the train go by and a faint, distant roar from where my grandparents lived. It was a great memory. For many children, those nights became a treasured memory, as it was mine. And it lasted a lifetime. Oh, I miss you, Grandma. If the porch was full, some families slept out in the yard or beneath the shade trees. And in crowded cities where the yards were impossible to find, people climbed to rooftops and they would stretch out, even on the fire escapes. They were hoping to catch the slightest breath of cool air. Now let's talk about the heat wave of 1896, which was even more tragic than the 1936 heat wave. Unlike the Dust Bowl, the 1836 disaster struck crowded cities where thousands of poor families lived in brick apartment buildings where the heat was completely trapped. It was the summer that the city could not escape. America was changing, and cities like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, St. Louis were growing at astonishing paces. Factories were running day and night, and immigrants crowded into these neighborhoods. And then came the heat. Imagine living in a fourth-floor apartment building in New York City. The windows are wide open, but there's no breeze. The brick walls heated all day long and are now radiating that heat back into your room. Long after sunset, those buildings became a furnace. Thick smoke was pouring through the streets from factories, and the smell of thousands of horses filled the streets below. You cannot sleep. Children cannot sleep. For wealthy families, there was options. Some escaped to their country homes or their seaside villages. But working families, they had no choice. Many lived 6, 8 people into one room. Entire families were crowded into fire escapes. They were just hoping that there would be a breeze to survive until morning. One detail that's often forgotten are the horses. The horses in 1896 were powering nearly every city. They pulled the streetcars, the wagons, the ambulances, the fire engines, and all the deliveries. As the temperature climbed, horses began collapsing where they stood. Drivers desperately poured buckets of water over them, but many never got back up. They were being hauled away. There's a lot of death certificates back then of people not only with heat stroke, but also from spoiled milk. There was no refrigerations, and families were struggling to keep the food safe. Doctors were watching helplessly as dehydration and illness spread through these crowded neighborhoods. Many mothers sat beside the window, gently fanning their sweet little babies, hoping that they would just survive the night. But some didn't. Newspapers were counting, not the war, not from crime, but the weather, the temperatures, and the death counts that were pouring in. Undertakers were struggling to keep up, and the church bells were ringing again and again. And what was left were those that survived over a week long of oppressive heat. All of a sudden, the clouds began to gather. The cool wind started stirring. The rain was falling, and people stepped into the streets with their faces to the sky. Children were laughing, adults were crying with happiness, and for many, it felt like they had survived a siege. But by then, thousands of lives were going to be forever changed. Sometimes history isn't about politics or wars that are going on, but the everyday weather that people endured. When the summer rich could escape, the poor could not. It was summer when the ice delivery could mean the difference between comfort and survival. Did you have any ancestors living in New York, Chicago, or Philadelphia, or any of those large cities in 1896? I wonder if they ever appeared in the newspapers. Maybe one of your family members was the iceman, the doctor, the nurse, the streetcar operator, or the horse teamster during that summer. Maybe there's old photographs or newspapers about your family members. Do you ever remember them talking about stories from back then? Or stories being handed down generation by generation? Mornings began way before the sun came up. Summer days didn't begin at 8 o'clock. They often began way before 5 a.m. The rooster's crow wasn't simply part of the country life. It was nature's alarm clock, and they were probably already started before then. By the first hint of daylight, farmers were already hitching the horses to the wagons. Women were drawing the cool water from the well before the morning sun even warmed up that bucket. Bread was baking in the oven already. Gardens were being watered, and laundry lines were already beginning to fill. Everyone understood that once the afternoon sun reached the highest point, work would become slower, harder, and sometimes dangerous. Many of our ancestors measured the days by the moment of the sun instead of the hands on the clock. Every season has its own soundtrack. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sounds that your great-grandparents may have heard on a hot July afternoon. The rhythmic squeak of that screen door opening and slamming shut. The distant laughter of children splashing in a creek. The steady buzz of the bees drifting through all the beautiful wildflowers. And a horse's hooves that were echoing down a dusty road. It was the creak of that porch swing swaying back and forth. A hand fan gently fluttering during Sunday church. The crack of a baseball bat in an open field. These weren't just sounds, they were the heartbeats of summertime. Back then, the Iceman was an absolute hero. Today, ice is something we hardly even think about. We push a button on the refrigerator, and it just tumbles down into our glass. But imagine being that child in 1905. You hear the clippity-clop of the horses approaching from down the street. And somebody suddenly shouts, "Here comes the ice wagon!" And the children, they all would race outside. The Iceman would step down carrying a giant steel tongs, capable of gripping enormous blocks of crystal clear ice harvested months earlier from the frozen lakes. They would wrap it in burlap to slow down that melting. Each block was carefully carried into the kitchen and placed inside the family's icebox. And sometimes, if the driver was feeling generous, he'd chip a tiny piece off for the little children waiting nearby. Those little pieces of ice were little treasures on a scorching summer afternoon. Now, can you imagine the excitement? Something we now make automatically once was the greatest treats of childhood that they could receive in the summer. Now, back then, they had summer kitchens. Cooking dinner inside the house during July could rise the indoor temperatures by 20 degrees or more. Wood-burning stoves produced incredible heat. Enough heat to heat the whole house for winter. And that's why many of the homes back then had what was known as the summer kitchen. I'll show you a picture of what my great-grandparents' summer kitchen looked like, or what is left of it now. It was often located just behind the house or in a small outbuilding or a little addition to the side of the house, a little breezeway. It allowed mothers and grandmothers to prepare the meals without turning the main house into an absolute oven. Fresh vegetables came straight from the garden. Milk was lowered into the well or stored in spring houses to keep from spoiling. and everything required planning. Every single meal represented hard work and hours of preparing. Now, as the evening settled across the countryside, something remarkable would happen. People would come outside. Neighbors would wave from their porch, from porch to porch. When the children were catching all those lightning bugs and putting them in those blue mason jars. Grandfathers rocked slowly on their wooden chairs while telling the stories passed down from their own childhood, from their own grandparents. And it was the smell of fresh cut hay that drifted through the air. Now, history isn't always found in the courthouse records or family photographs faded in time. Sometimes it's found in grandmother's rocking chair, a weathered porch swing, or a child's laughter echoing across an open field. These are the quiet moments that tell us just as much about our ancestors as the dates carved on their gravestones. As a genealogist, we spend countless hours searching for birth records and marriage records, licenses, military service files, and cemetery stones for sure. But have you ever stopped to ask a different question? How did your ancestors spend that hot summer afternoon? What did your great-great-grandmother do to keep all those children cool in the summer heat? Did your grandfather play and chase frogs in that nearby creek of their farmhouse? Did your family gather beneath the giant oak tree after Sunday dinners? I know we sure did. Now, these are the moments that rarely appear in official records, yet they were moments that made up everyday life. Now, when we start asking these questions, our family trees become more than just the names and the dates. It becomes filled with the living, breathing people whose lives were surprisingly similar to our own, and maybe a little bit more simpler. And perhaps that's what makes history so fascinating. Now, the next time you walk into a cool home after spending so much time outside in a blazing summer day, pause for just a moment. Listen to that quiet hum of your air conditioner. Feel that cold glass of ice water in your hand. And think about all the generations that came before you. They endured the same summer sun without any electricity, without air conditioning, and often without even ice. They found comfort in the shade of the towering trees, on breezy sleeping porches beside the cool creeks, and in the company of family gathered on those front porches as the days suddenly faded into the nights. History isn't only found in battles, presidential speeches, or dusty history books. Sometimes it's hidden in the simple everyday moments. A grandmother gently waving a hand fan during church or in any hot afternoon. Children chasing all those lightning bugs through the backyard, as I know I did as a child. The creak of those porch swings, the arrival of that neighborhood ice wagon, and the smell of fresh cut hay drifting through an open window on a warm July evening. These are the ordinary moments that remind us that our ancestors weren't so different from us. They laughed, they loved, they worked really hard, they worried, and they searched for that relief. From the very same summer heat that we experience today. Oh yeah, it's hot. It's very hot. But those real magic moments happen when we begin to understand how our ancestors actually lived. What they saw, what they heard, what they smelled, and how they experience the world all around them in everyday life. Because genealogy isn't just about building a family tree. It's about bringing all those branches back to life. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Jodi Genealogy, where every forgotten story begins with us, one step closer to the people who come before us. If you enjoyed today's journey into the past, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. How did your parents or your grandparents stay cool in the summer heats? Did you ever hear of them sleeping on those old porches? Swimming in those nearby creeks? Did you ever hear of them waiting for the Iceman? Now, your family memories are history too, and I'd love to hear them. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. And share this story with someone who loves history as much as you and I do. Until next time, keep searching and keep preserving those stories that time has almost forgot, because every family has a story and every place has a past. And together here on Jodi Genealogy, we're bringing history back to life, one story at a time. Bye, everybody. Oh, you can buy a little bonnet for yourself. Oh my goodness, how cute are these? Oh, look at that.